Hello and welcome to the Classic Car Weekly podcast, the sibling podcast to the popular weekly title. I'm this week's host, Jesse Billington, and I'm again joined by our deputy editor, Chris Hope.
Hello.
And we are joined by our editor-in-chief, David Simister.
Good morning.
Gents, how are we? And we'll kick off, as we usually do, with an Our Classics catch-up. But again, we're sort of deep in that winter mire still. Has there been any progress? Certainly not on my side of things. It's been quiet, let's say.
Yeah, for me, the good news is my Toyota Avensis is no longer steering like a super tanker that's been on the sherry. The steering was getting very the play was getting a bit ridiculous, and it was still drivable, still legal, but it wasn't the most fun thing to be out in. So this was picking up on some MOT advisories. It needed the joints and leading up to the steering rack replacing. So they've now been in. It's been replaced, and it's now I wouldn't say it's a Lotus Elise, but it's at least now if you turn it into a corner, having to twirl the wheel till tomorrow to get it to go around the corner, which is nice when you're out when you live in Lancashire and you've got lots of country lanes.
Yeah, the front end at least responds to the inputs you're making from the cabin, which is always a positive sign.
Yeah, it's better than having. I remember many years ago I was driving a Daimler 66 that actually had issues with the rack itself, and I remember the experience quite vividly of going into a corner and turning the wheel, and not that it was being slow to respond, it was just nothing happened, and you twirl again and still nothing happens. And then just as you're about to put the emergency services on speed dial because you're going to have a crash, it would then finally, after a lot of twirling, it would finally start responding. That's quite unnerving, but this was more just having I wouldn't say it was quite into the pre-war levels of wonder, but it was certainly having to work the wheel more than you'd usually be accustomed to. So I'm glad that that's all sorted.
I don't think I've ever driven
not what you want from a Toyota, is it? So
no,
you time
driving is
precision and reliability, don't you? So
yes.
I don't think I've ever driven anything with particularly bad steering in that sense, where you've got to sort of put in miles and miles of sort of steering input. I think possibly the worst has to be the Riley Monaco that I did on possibly my second shoot at Classic Car Week. Which was a
1930s, mate. Again, you can forgive it, can't you?
Yeah, but the problem was I also then literally got into what was the car I had after? A Lagonda V12.
The Lagonda.
But that had
Lagonda where you literally turned out of the area where it was being stored, chuffed along for maybe sort of 400 yards, and then came to an undignified stop right in the middle of some HS2 works. So
yeah. Well, that's ran out of fuel. But once we got fuel in it and driving, the steering on that was really sweet.
Was it not also fuel in the right tank as well? Because it was a double tanker, wasn't it?
I think it was a double tanker, but no one knew where the switch was to send the pickup to the other side. So we might have had
So there might have been fuel there already. We just didn't know what we were doing.
Didn't know how to get it in there. But once up and running, that steered really nicely. The Riley, though, was janky, is the only way to describe it. A lot of steering input just to keep it in a straight line, let alone trying to get it to turn around. And I remember it also scared the photographer on the day because he wasn't quite prepared for the fact that to get it to stop, it required a lot of pedal effort and all the wheels to lock. So that was a bit terrifying moment for him as I kept barreling towards him, all four locked up.
It's a little unfair to single out, things from that sort of era. I mean, I could quite easily sort of say, I think something like it was either it was certainly the 1910s, maybe even early 1920s Morgan three-wheel that I drove. And I do remember the steering not being especially precise on that, but that was far more overshadowed by the fact that you had all these exterior controls for the gear change was outside of the actual cabin. The throttle was adjusted on the steering wheel, sort of thing. So yeah, I was more sort of concerned about that, and as you say, a complete lack of stopping power, than I was about especially whether I was steering in the right direction or not. I think I was in Norfolk. It was dead straight roads. The steering was not the issue of the day, sort of thing. So.
I mean, 1920s standard Chalker that we drove when we did that standard shoot a couple of years back as well. That steered all right, but again, it was the fact that it's all the other controls that just occupy the brain space at the time. Pedals in the wrong order, gearboxes backwards. A lot of the inputs are made through sort of a series of levers on the steering wheel. And then we try and I have to do a hill start on Sunrising Hill in Warwickshire. in a 1920s car with a crash box, and that took more arms and legs than I think I had, and all of my brain power, because I was like,
Yes.
okay, set sort of the throttle there, set the foot throttle, try and hold it on the handbrake there, make sure we've got it into first over here, feed out the clutch until I can feel it starting to take power, handbrake off, holding it still in gear until it's officially joined, and then sort of increase foot and hand throttle. I was like, I'm running.
It was Northamptonshire as well. Was it Dasset that we went to the top of? And you had to sort of, come back through these very sort of narrow sort of feeder lanes and things like that as well. So it's not like you had the most sort of space. So I was quite cruel to you at the start of the things, wasn't I? I really did sort of properly throw you in the deep end with some of these shoots, didn't I? So
yeah. I didn't get an easy sort of entry point. I remember we certainly did some Rising Hill and Burton Dasset for the standard shoots. You had a standard, was it a standard 10? I think you had.
No, Vanguard.
Vanguard.
No, Vanguard, because I really enjoyed it. I was really impressed by just how sort of solid feeling. It was like a Road P4, just like really, it felt really massively over-engineered sort of thing. And I was really quite impressed by how modern it felt sort of thing for a 1950s car. So yeah, I love the styling as well on the early phase Vanguard. So
yeah. David, have you had anything that's been particularly wayward on a road test? Not necessarily sort of bad handling, but just sort of chaotic inputs?
Well, I think part of this is all the fun of sort of older classics, particularly pre-war cars. I mean, I remember driving a standard 10 horsepower, and again, the steering was quite wondery. You were having to do a lot of work just to keep it, as you say, going into a straight line rather than actively cornering. But again, with a lot of these pre-war cars, that's just how they are, and you become accustomed to how they drive. So none of it is particular. I think it's all part of the charm of the car. I think it's when cars aren't working as they're originally engineered and they clearly have problems. But I remember driving an E-Type which clearly had gearbox issues, and it was hard work compared to other E-Types.
Because I know the early gearboxes on the E-Types were sort of Moss boxes, like proper crash units that were
this was a Series 2 E-Type, so it didn't have the one of the later boxes, but there was clearly something up with it, and again, it just made it harder work than it needed to be.
If anything, Jesse and I have had the opposite effect of steering, where it's been too precise. I'm thinking back to the photo shoot we did of that Evo in Impreza sort of thing, where it just felt impossible to keep it on the road at anything above 40 mile an hour, just because it was just so sharp, and so we were properly sort of like stressing and like everything was tense, just like trying to keep these cars, both of them. Was it the Subaru? I can't remember which one it was. There was one of them. I think it was the Subaru that was just like well beyond sort of.
Yeah, it was the Subaru that I remember. Your final comment was like, you need a rally stage or a racetrack to properly get close to the bounce of what that car could do, because it was so well set up, it gripped, and it had an enormous amount of power. You could just keep rinsing it. The Mitsubishi Evo,
it was the B road back roads around Northamptonshire again, where it was just like it just was. They were not perfect enough for what that car needed in terms of it was just so pockmarked and so sort of undulating that it was a real challenge. So
I liked the Evo for that, but again, you couldn't really try and stretch it on a B road. You couldn't enjoy it. You were constantly sort of having to knowingly drive it at 7/10 because it was so aggressively sort of built up. You're like, it's good, but I can't enjoy all the good here. I mean, you mentioned obviously standard and the Vanguard. I think there was a Vanguard on the Standard Owners Club stand at the MG and Triumph Spares Day, which I attended at Stoneleigh Park at the weekend.
Yeah.
And this is a brilliant little show, takes up 3 halls at Stoneleigh. Really interesting layouts, lots of interesting cars to look at, as well as huge arrays of parts and Autojumble kicking around. So this is the question I wanted to ask, obviously, while I was there. I was sort of snooping around a couple of cars here and there, looking at builds, layouts, ways things are adjusted. Certainly on an MG a family member's got at the moment, he's sort of building it up, and I sent him a picture of one that was very similar, and he was like, could you just check the clutch linkage? So sort of having a poke around for that. So I want to ask, what's the sort of the classic bargains you've picked up at sort of jumbles, meets and shows, whether it's tools, parts, or even advice? Because obviously these shows are renowned for having clubs and experts floating around, what's the best bit you've picked up at an event?
You want to go, David?
Oh, I'm just trying to think what I've picked up at shows. It tends to be sort of things for my room, my study, I would say. So I remember picking up many years ago, which anyone who's familiar with my usual backdrop of my study will have seen my enormous Italian job artwork in my room. And I remember I picked it up from the British Mini Fair many years ago, and while it looks great, the problem we had was that we went in a Mini. And obviously it wouldn't fit in the boots of a Mini, and it wouldn't fit in the interior of a Mini either, because there were 4 of us there. So luckily the Mini that we went in was a British, it was a Mini Open Classic, with the full length retractable sunroof, which you might remember was a popular thing on 90s Minis. So it would fit if we had that open, and we lowered it in through the roof. But unfortunately that meant driving back up the M6 in January with the roof open, which my Mini owning mates have still not forgiven me for.
with what probably effectively became a sale as well. So I can't imagine your wind resistance was especially great that day. So
no, but the artwork has survived to tell the tale.
I got donated a Haynes manual for an MR2 Mark 1. And that's how I ended up with my first classic. So it was one of those where I think, what was it life changing? Well, life changing in the sense of it, put me in behind the wheel of my first classic sort of thing. I was sort of dithering, and I think one of the chaps on the store sort of overheard me sort of thing, and he said, just help yourself sort of thing. So that'd be a good one to have sort of thing. So it set me on my road with my MR2 that I enjoyed for many years. So.
Yeah, I mean, I had plenty of the bits I normally pick up these days are every time I go to a show now, my little one insists that he has to have a Hot Wheels model bringing back as a souvenir, because that's how 5-year-olds roll. So a lot of the time now I'm out looking around the models for things to bring back for him.
Yeah, but I don't know. I've got a 5-year-old myself, sort of thing, and I'll go to the effort of finding the actual models. I'll go to I think the last thing I got from him, which will have probably been like the NEC show in November, was a Mark II Jag. It just goes in the box with the rest of them. I try to sort of handpick the ones that aren't sort of, the crazy Hot Wheels sort of not based on real life, pure fiction ones. And it's those that he's more fussed about sort of things. So I do try and at least make sure he has a few sort of Ford Sierra Cosworths and things like that as well. Try to steer him towards them. It doesn't always work.
Yeah, I mean, for me, certainly the first resto show I went to, which was not long after buying the MG, I ended up buying parts to fix it there. So that was sort of obviously quite a high watermark for importance of picking up parts at a show. That was a new windscreen wiper switch, a fan belt, and a series of fuses, which all were then fitted in a hotel car park. But then certainly the best piece of advice I've had is how to properly fold down the roof on the midget as well, because you think it's just the 2 catches at the front and just sort of it tumbles backwards, but the amount of people that just sort of fold it backwards and shove it down, it bends the frame, and worse still, it creases really badly the sort of plastic window that sits in the back of the roof, and then they crack and they fail. And someone sort of showed me sort of the official process for doing it, and sort of you lay it out flat against the boot, fold in the sides, roll it, tuck it under, and then the sort of tonneau cover fits onto it nicely. So for advice, that I think in the long run, certainly because this apparently had a new roof fitted sometime around 2017, it'd be nice to sort of be able to preserve that roof and sort of keep that investment nice and safe and clean. So that was a great piece of advice.
I remember when I started doing cars for sale, a dealer sort of explained to me exactly that, how to drop the soft top without sort of damaging it, sort of thing. And it's advice that's always stuck with me. And it's advice that's always sort of helped with those sort of initial breaking the ice whenever you're sort of driving owners' cars and you have to sort of lower the roof. And if you're able to sort of do that and show them that you can do that with care, it makes the rest of the day go that little bit more straightforwardly. It doesn't feel like they're quite a sort of, on you for, be careful, and are you making sure you're doing that sort of thing. So yeah, that is a good one, sort of thing. So it's a lot of money to throw down the drain as well, isn't it, sort of thing, through a couple of minutes just sort of been showing that extra bit of care and attention, sort of thing. So the particularly with the plastic screens in winter as well, in particular, because we are mad enough to drop soft tops for photo shoots in winter if the weather's decent, sort of thing. So yeah, it's not worth it, is it? So
yeah, to have to go to the effort of retrimming and refitting a new roof, I would be quite miffed at doing that, because you can't, or I do think it would take a lot of time and effort to sort of unpick the stitching and reapply sort of a plastic screen to the bit. And also I've got the quarters in it as well, so I've also got the sides bits that sort of give you that extra bit of rear visibility. Again, making sure that you fold in sort of the canvas fabric between them so you don't pinch them is just sort of a great piece of advice. And it just looks neater on the car when it's parked up as well. I don't have to worry about leaving the roof down for a long time, because I know that I rolled it properly and kept it tucked and tight. Race Retro last year, when I was starting to build the engine up, I bought some tiny little stub stacks and some covers for it. Never ended up fitting those because they didn't quite line up with the bolt holes for the HS4s that I run. But it did sort of lead me down the path to eventually sort of contacting Berlin, who remanufacture and continue the production of SU parts. So I was able to get hold of some proper ones that are tuned for that engine, the right length, the right breathing. So there's been some interesting bits and pieces there, but it's just sort of one of those things of that's the fun of the community in these shows, where you've got the auto jumbles and the fun bits to pick up. I know that I've also gone down the model route, picked up sort of the odd car here or there for friends that are sort of collectors of certainly F1 models as well. You spot like the really nice boxed F1 models that are for sort of fans of that. I think you also got a Lola for a friend who loves the old 60s, 70s endurance series. So there's treasure to be had. And again, we've got Race Retro coming up in 2 weeks, and we've got the Resto show coming up soon. Both have huge treasure troves of Autojumble attached. So if you're thinking about heading along, certainly give those areas a quick look around, because there's always something to be had there. And even if you're working on your car at the show, they also prove great when you realise you don't have enough tools, and because you've now cracked open a brake caliper, you need brake fluid and a brake bleed kit. So you can run around with an hour of the show left to buying all these parts, sort of furiously sort of stockpiling them and sort of running back to your car and bleeding out the brake system.
It's not just the likes of the Resto show where you intentionally are taking your car apart and now need bits that you didn't think of. There's plenty of shows that you've been to where you're broken down and then need something to fix and something to rescue. Was it headlights or something that you needed the last time you were at a show? I seem to remember. I don't think I've needed headlights at a show. What was it? There was something where you needed to go off and quickly find it just so you could drive your ar home at the end of the day. I could have sworn it was.
It was definitely the wiper switch at the 2023 rest.
That might have been it, yeah.
Because essentially as I was driving it up there, the headlight switch just sort of disassembled and disappeared into the dashboard, didn't turn on the wipers in the process. So I had to sort of jam wires together to get them to... So I had wipers to drive through the night and rain to get to the NEC. Got to the hotel car, or just as I was coming off the sort of last section of motorway, I noticed that all of a sudden some of the gauges on my dashboard were no longer working, and I'd lost a couple of lights around the vehicle. So I was slowly sort of suffering like this ongoing sequence of electrical failures. And I was like, okay, gonna have to try and diagnose this. I think I also bought a second Haynes manual while I was there, like a different shop guide that just offered some different advice or different bits and pieces, mostly so I could have a wiring guide to go back through the fuse block to figure out what was going on there. Turns out someone had also fitted the original fuse block backwards with corroded terminals and dead fuses. So I did then also later buy a new fuse block and refit that. So that was like the first point of starting a lot of overhauling work on that car, was a very drawn out breakdown before the Resto show, then buying a load of stuff at the Resto show to start fixing it.
I remember actually a couple of years ago where you were talking about the MG Triumph show, and I was at that event a couple of years ago, and I met a chap there, and he had an MGF, and I was chatting away to him because he was actually working on his car in the Vista car park, and I said to him, well, what's up with your car? And he says, oh, the alternator on it's gone. And I said, oh, have you got far to go tonight? And he goes, yeah, I'm going to Germany. And it turns out he'd actually got the ferry over from Hook of Holland Townshend over to Harwich the night before, and his return sailing was that night after the show. So basically, he had to get that alternator fixed, or basically he wasn't going home. So I remember he went into the show, found a specialist who had an alternator, he bought it, and came back out into the visiting classic car area, and with help from a couple of friends, fitted the alternator, and he's back up on the road, and he managed to get from Stony Park back to Harwich, in time for his ferry back to Holland that night.
Very nice.
That's good going. I remember doing the tightening up certainly the fan belt, which turns the alternator on the midget, in the hotel car park, using some tools I'd borrowed from Matt Tompkins. So I sort of was like, I need tools. And I was like, this was very early days for me at Classic Car Weekly still. And I was like, the only person I knew really at the show whose tools I could borrow was Tompkins on PC. So I had to wait until the end of the Friday, because obviously they were doing the live restoration. So I could borrow his tools, fix my car overnight, and then bring him back the tools the next morning in the show. So it was very kind of him to lend me a socket set and a small pry bar to try and sort of tension the fan belt. But that was one of the great hurdles of my early years at Classic Car Weekly. And fondly remembered now, especially because I stood there sort of clearly with now oil on my jeans, wearing an anorak in the pouring rain with my phone flashlight going as a wedding party arrived at the hotel, and sort of clearly looks over, and I sort of look up, bedraggled, soaked, covered in dirt, and I'm like, hello, don't mind me. And I was like, is this going to be a normal part of my life going forwards? Apparently it was. So one of those great moments from sort of shows, picking up sort of parts and certainly advice and help. But we'll move on from sort of parts and maintenance advice to buying advice. And we've obviously got a lot of buying advice in the latest issue. We've got an enormous price guide as well as our top picks for sort of the best ways to spend your money to get the most fun out of a classic car, I think is the best way of framing this. And included in that, we have Fuzz Townshend picking a top 10. So he's got some interesting choices included in this, but I wanted to turn that attention to you guys and say, which of Fuzz's picks most takes your fancy?
Well, I think for me, it's I've already kind of have to declare an interest on this one because I've already bought a Mazda X5. In fact, I've bought two over the years, and I agree with everything Fuzz says on that. Of course, it's a bit of an obvious choice, but they offer tremendous value for money. Yes, they can go a bit rusty if you don't look after them, but they are bomb-proof reliability-wise. They will take big mileages if you look after them, and there's a huge amount of specialist and club support for them. In terms of the other buys that he mentions as well, I mean, there's some really interesting choices in there. Interesting, he talks about trying TR value slipping, because that's something I've seen in the market as well. So they offer a lot of car for the money, but I think the one which probably interests me most is the Rolls-Royce Silver Shadow, because you can get Rolls-Royce Silver Shadows for under 10k, and same with the Bentley T-Series cars as well. But you've got to be careful when you're buying them, because one, rust, two, making sure that it's been serviced and looked after, and also make sure you don't underestimate a tied interior, because the cost of retrimming a cabin on a Silver Shadow can rack up very quickly.
Well, there's the ongoing cost of keeping one on the road as well, isn't it? It's a car that's famed for high maintenance bills just because of the sophisticated nature of it all. But you've got things like the Rolls-Royce Enthusiast Club. They hold sort of regular seminars where they share all this knowledge so that you can take it home and apply it on your driveway or in your garage at home, sort of thing. So it's not insurmountable. And yeah, David's right. It's a heck of a lot of car for your money, isn't it?
They are really interesting buys, and I think certainly for around that £10,000 mark, you're picking up a lot of really interesting car. But buy wisely. Chris, your pick, although I'm hesitant to sort of say that you're going to go for anything other than the TR, because it is a soft spot for you.
Absolutely. I would dearly love to think that I could find one for £10,000, but I think it's probably gonna need a little bit of TLC if you can find one, sort of thing. So no, I was looking at the Amazon, which is the car that I wanted to buy instead of the Mini, if I'm being completely honest, but the garage wouldn't accept it. So I think everything that Fuzz says about the Amazon is absolutely spot on. It's got, most of them have rear seat belts. They're stunning to look at. And they are cars that can genuinely be pressed into daily service. If, as he puts it, your modern is having a sulk. And I've gone through quite a period of time recently where my moderns have gone into sulk, both of them, in fact. So yeah, it would have been very useful to have an Amazon sort of thing. Although I probably wouldn't have with the amount of salt that we had on the roads towards the end of the year anyway. But no, I think a four-door Amazon is a really sort of practical and versatile car. I just wish I had a big enough garage to accommodate one.
Yeah, I like the Amazon as well. Having recently done a buying guide for the PV 544 or 455, the sort of the predecessor to the 120 series, I've got a bit of a thing for that sort of 50s era of Volvo. There's some really interesting engineering that goes into them. And the Amazon's quite a handsome looking car, especially in two-door guys. I think that's a really wise buy. Again, find a good one for under 10 and you're doing really quite nicely. For me,
Plus, it's absolutely spot on with the SLK as well. Remains one of the great mysteries of the classic car hobby and the classic car market. That something so sophisticated that is so advanced can be had for such a little amount of money. When you look at the equivalent cars, they all tend to outstrip it. It is possible to get an SLK for somewhere in the region of £2,000, £3,000. And to that, my mind just boggles. It is absolutely crazy. So if you've got that £10,000 budget, you can literally got your pick of cars sort of thing in terms of be it color, be it condition, be it particular history. It literally is the world is your oyster sort of thing. And yes, it's more of a GT than it is a sports car, and that perhaps dampens values a little bit because people expect it to sort of be that little bit more sort of raw and enthusing along the lines of an MGF or even sort of a BMW Z3. But take it for what it is and appreciate it for what it can do. And it is a stupid amount of car for the money.
Yeah, they are absolutely lovely cars. I've had a couple on test before, and they handle really, really nicely. I think people sort of call it a bit of a small GT because it has a pillowy ride, but it's still direct. You can still engage with it and really enjoy it on a back road. It's just very pliant in its nature of doing that. And I think they are, like you said, a really good buy. And again, £10,000 gives you a huge scope for that early series of the SLK. For me, though, the interesting one is the Austin 7. Yeah. There's this huge cry to try and get younger people or sort of new classic fans into sort of pre-war stuff, vintage stuff. And this is such a great way of doing it because the Austin 7 is very approachable. There's a huge club supporting them. You can get all the parts for them, so they're being reconditioned, remade. And there's no better way of doing it. There's such sort of friendly and approachable cars and people around them that I don't see why you shouldn't. If you're looking to get something a little bit different, if you don't need a classic that's going to be racking up the miles, just something for sort of heading off to local shows, events and meets, a 7 is going to be absolutely perfect. And you can get them in so many different guises. You can do so much to them yourself. You can build them up into your own specials. You can rebody them relatively easily. They're small and easy to keep in a garage. I think is sort of an interesting way of getting into a classic and getting into a completely different realm of classic in that vintage world. I think an Austin 7 is an absolutely perfect choice. And yeah, there's a bit of my heart that does a bit hanker for one in a slightly silly manner, but I think they're just fun. I think they're a bit quirky, a bit fun, and sort of the chance to do fun things with them. The VSCC has so many great events.
I see them almost in the same way I would see sort of a Land Rover or an off-roader, in that if you're going to get one, then you're not making the most out of it if you're not also doing green laning. I think the Austin 7 is kind of that same way. If you're going to have an Austin 7, then really to get the most out of the ownership experience, you want to be doing things with the Vintage Sports Car Club because it is so varied, and it doesn't have to be sort of driving up stupid hills in stupidly muddy hills and things like that. There's plenty of other things that club does as well, on the track, off the track, in fields, and parking rather than sort of tearing it up sort of thing. So it strikes me as one of those cars where if you are going to go down that route, then really you're doing yourself a disservice by not getting involved with that side of it.
The tours, tests and shows that make up the rest of a very busy VSCC calendar really worth sort of being a part of if you have that car. And I think that's the thing with a lot of other classics, you can just use them in isolation, relatively speaking. I would recommend doing otherwise. I'd recommend finding people, finding the communities, finding the clubs. But a vintage car really thrives in having that community around you. And it is a really exciting community. You go along to a VSCC meet. I'm heading off this weekend to the Pomeroy Trophy, which is going to have a huge amount of spectators, but also the people taking part all know each other from the VSCC. They all know each other from owning these cars and have this sort of great connection with other people around their cars. That's the important thing.
Yeah, they're not a clique though, are they? I think I think this is probably true with a lot of clubs, but the VSCC in particular, very welcoming, very open to have a conversation with you, sort of thing. I've been to a couple of their events before, sort of thing. I've never really felt like an outsider, even though I clearly am. Just being a member of the media that rocks up just to sort of cover one of their events, sort of thing. They've always made me feel welcome.
They are always sort of just nice people to bump into and have a chat with. I think the 7 offers a chance to get into that world. I can't say the same for the Ferguson. I know so little about classic tractors. I'm surprised that snuck in there, but it's an interesting choice, especially
Classic Car Weekly is the name of the title. I think, I think he got his wild card in there, didn't he, David?
Yeah. Well, you say that, but I was at the Resto show last year, and the one of the award winners was the Young Retro Motor Club, and one of its members who was on that stand drove all the way from his home, which I can't remember where it was, but it was quite away from the NEC in Birmingham, and he drove all the way there in his Ferguson. So that's proof that there are enthusiasts out there who do use them regularly as classics.
Yeah, I think it blends into the classic vehicle scene, I think, quite nicely. And again, weirdly enough, the Fergusons you can get parts for, and you can sort of still enjoy them. I can't remember if these still had the same or similar engine architecture to the Triumph, sort of the TR4s, that sort of 2.2 inline 4. But it's, yeah, again, that thing of there is the community for them, there is the support for them, there is the idea you can do something fun with them, even if it takes you the best part of 4 hours to drive to the NEC for the Resto show in it.
Yeah, it just means you can enjoy the scenery on the way there.
Yeah, got no choice.
A chance to really soak it all up. But anyway, that's sort of a quick dive into this week's issue. Obviously, like we said, we've got some team picks of top classics that you can buy for. I think we've set sort of the target of under £10,000, and there's some really interesting picks in there, from the obvious choices, the Mark II MX-5, the Volkswagen Beetle, to some rather more inspired choices. I absolutely love the inclusion of we've got the Gilbert Invader on there as well, which I think is a really overlooked classic when it comes to sort of buying around that price point, and a really interesting choice. On top of that, we have live coverage, like I said, from the MG and Triumph Spares Day at Stanley Park, and of course an enormous price guide covering, how many cars have we got in there, David, for under £50,000?
A lot. It's. I think we. I haven't gone through and counted them line by line, but I think it's throughout the course of the issue, there's over 1,000 cars which we've got details on. So 35 pages of advice. So there's a lot to take in. So if you're going to buy a classic car, whether it's your first car or your 50th, your classic cars are cheaper than they were. We've got the stats to prove that, and so go out there, have some fun, snap up your next classic.
Perfect chance to pick up something very interesting indeed. Otherwise, if you guys haven't got anything else to add, we'll wrap up the episode there and get cracking on with the next issue of Classic Car Weekly.
But a pleasure as always.
Thanks very much for joining, and we'll be back next week with another edition of Classic Car Weekly and another episode of the CCW podcast.